Before this video starts, I'd just like to make an announcement. I have the Liberal Tears mug for $14.99 on my website. It is the first link in the description if you want to go pick one up. Don't worry if it breaks when it comes to your house. I'll send you another one for free out of my pocket. I don't care. I want you to get your Liberal Tear mug. It comes in Liberal Tears white with the face, black with the face, white without the face, and black without the face. So pick whichever one you want, and it'll come to your door in about 3 to 5 days. So that should be epic. First link in the description. Thank you. Let's go on with the video.
Pennsylvania and State College. I want to know what your opinion is. Weed, yay or nay?
So decriminalization of weed, yay. Weed, nay. Okay, meaning that I'm libertarian when it comes to weed. I will also say that the no.
I'm not going to attack you, bro. I'm not going to attack you.
I didn't think you were going to. You're high. Weed's a downer. So in any case, so to finish the thought, I'm for decriminalization of weed, but I find people who smoke weed to be losers. So that's my brief summation, because it kills your brain cells and it's a waste of time. Jordan says, with the Portugal experimenting of decriminalization of all drugs being moderately successful, is legalizing and regulating any or all drug sales a viable way to help combat the power and wealth of gangs in cities like Chicago? I'm not for using drugs just against the black market. So, I'm pretty libertarian when it comes to drugs. There are certain drugs that cause externalities, like PCP makes people violent. That should be illegal. But if you're talking about drugs that you just take and it makes you high and you ruin your life, that's really your business as long as I'm not paying for it. The big problem with decriminalization of drugs is you have to ensure that the decriminalized price of drugs is below the street market price of drugs. So one of the problems we have in California is you decriminalize marijuana, but the price that you get at the marijuana dispensary is still higher than black market marijuana, so people still buy on the black market. You haven't destroyed the black market. You just created a black market that is in competition with the real market. In order to really do this, it would work. Actually, decriminalization of drugs, there's a good case to be made that decriminalization of drugs would actually work better on the level of harder core drugs that are more expensive rather than cheaper drugs. That would actually be the case, the strong case, the economic case for decriminalization. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. Over the last couple of days, Joe Biden has been out there talking, and one of the things he's been talking about is what he likes to call the cancer moonshot. Well, I didn't know cancer was on the moon, but there you have it. So the cancer moonshot. This is the idea that we're going to spend inordinate amounts of federal money in order to research cancer treatments and end cancer. We'll listen to Joe Biden talk about it for a second, then I'll tell you what I don't like about this. Here's Joe Biden.
I've committed, and I promised before we leave, we will mow down any of the impediments that exist bureaucratically in the federal government to slow up the process.
So cooperation is one key. Money is a key. And I know that you've asked for $1 billion.
And we will get $1 billion because this is the, I've been doing this a long time. This is a truly bipartisan issue.
Okay, so it's a bipartisan issue. You'll get lots and lots of money. The barrier, there's always this idea on the left, and it's easy to fall into on the right too, that all the differences between us curing cancer and not curing cancer is just throwing money at the problem from a federal government perspective. It isn't true. It isn't true. There are certain areas in which the federal government is useful and good, although they screw it up a lot too, like vaccinations, for example, production of vaccinations during an emergency. There have been times in American history where we've gone into production on vaccines and it's been a complete waste of time, like in the 1970s. When it comes to cancer, first of all, people think of cancer as one disease. It isn't. It's an enormous spectrum of diseases. There are many different types of cancer. I'm speaking as somebody, my aunt died at 42 of cancer, of breast cancer. My other aunt had a preliminary double mastectomy because she was afraid of getting cancer. My grandfather died of cancer. My father has had a melanoma. Like, this is, this is something that everybody in the United States has experienced. What I'm saying here is I don't like the idea that government is God, and if we just give it enough power, it'll cure cancer for us. It's not true. Okay, what's actually going to cure cancer is not the kind of things the federal government is doing, but the things that the federal government hates on, like the pharmaceutical companies, the drug companies that actually produce the research that leads to practical results. So what the federal government does, they fund grants. My wife works in the medical industry. She's worked at a lab. This is true. They fund grants. The grants are for broad-based research. The idea is supposed to be that this broad-based research is then used to create the drugs that we use to treat the disease. That is very infrequent. Usually the way medicines are developed is that it's trial and error, right? This is why you have animal trials. It's not like, oh, we're going to go at it conceptually, a priori, blank slate. We just come in, tabula rasa, and we just create it out of our mind. Instead, what it is here's a cancer. We know it exists. Let's try a bunch of different things on it and see what works. That's how medicine is stumbling through the dark. Science is stumbling through the dark. That's why the scientific method of hypothesis and failure is the way it is. It's not come up with a great idea in your head and then later see if it works. It's we try it. If it fails, we come up with another hypothesis. If it fails, we come up with another hypothesis. So even from that perspective, the idea of mass federal funding is actually a relatively large waste of money. Certainly the idea of punishing pharmaceutical companies, which is so near and dear to Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton, and probably to Donald Trump as well. This idea is actually horrible because those pharmaceutical companies create the exact drugs that you are going to need if, God forbid, something happens.
Executive Director of the California Young Republicans Federated. I'm thrilled to have Ben Shapiro here. At 17, Ben was the youngest nationally syndicated columnist in America as part of the Creator Syndicate. Earlier in his career, he was the editor-at-large for Breitbart.com. He is the co-founder of Truth Revolt, the media watchdog site, wrote several successful books, and started his own law practice. Today, he's the editor-in-chief of DailyWire.com, as the host of The Ben Shapiro Show, the #1 conservative podcast on iTunes. So let's get started. So,
first of all, thank you all for your patience. I apologize on behalf of the airlines. Yeah, really. I wrote a piece this morning defending the airlines, and boy, do I feel terrible about that.
So today, there was a press conference regarding a lawsuit that was filed against UC Berkeley for suppressing the First Amendment rights of the Berkeley College Republicans and the Young Americans Foundation. This seems systemic almost in our culture now, where the left feels that they can aggressively and now violently suppress conservative speech on campus. So how do we fight it?
Well, I mean, I think that the way Ann is doing it is about the right way to do it. I mean, I did this also at Cal State Los Angeles. We had a similar situation where the administration tried to cancel a speech that I was giving at Cal State LA, and we told them to screw themselves. We were coming anyway. And then about an hour before that speech, they reversed themselves and they allowed me to speak, but it was a near riot. We ended up suing the university. So, this has become relatively systemic. I won't say that it's true for all these colleges. I speak at 25 to 30 of them a year, but I'd say like 3 or 4 a year are really bad. Obviously, I do wonder how much at Berkeley is the students and how much is Antifa. Yeah. Because I spoke at Berkeley like 2 years ago and it was no problem. And now Antifa is there making trouble. And it really is disgusting that the administration isn't working with the police to shut down Antifa. I mean, this is a violent group that is obviously violating the rights of people to hear free speech. And that's just, you can't have a rioter's veto this way. It's really awful.
You know, one thing I actually found kind of interesting about it is that they're in violation of the Klan Act, which was developed to fight the KKK, and now the anti-fascist racists are the ones violating it. And so what are your thoughts on kind of the transition of now they call themselves anti-fascist, but a lot of us think that they're actually the fascists?
Well, I mean, so the bottom line to me is whoever brings the gun to the party is the fascist. And these are the people who are bringing the club or the gun. So, but they have a generalized view of the world, which is that everybody who is conservative is a Nazi, and Nazis ought to be punched. So if you use that two-step logic, then everybody who is right-wing ought to be punched. There are 2 flaws to that. 1, you shouldn't punch Nazis unless Nazis are physically threatening you. And 2, not all right-wingers are Nazis, but they don't seem to see the connect.
So there's been obviously an escalation in willingness to do violence by these groups on campus and towards conservatives. How do we fight that escalation?
I mean, unfortunately, what you're seeing is you're starting to see groups that feel the necessity to show up and defend speakers, and I think that that's totally within their purview. I mean, I spoke on my podcast this week with a couple of people who showed up at another one of these free speech events in Berkeley, and one of these fights broke out, and it turned violent. If people aren't willing to stand up and defend their free speech, and the police are just going to stand by and do nothing, I don't see what choice people have other than to defend themselves. And listen, I would love to see a situation... I would love to see a situation where none of this violence breaks out. I didn't used to have to bring bodyguards to my public events. I didn't used to have to bring security when I would speak on college campuses. Now, whenever I speak on a college campus, I have to bring 2 members of security, and we have to coordinate with the police beforehand. This is something that didn't exist 2 years ago, and I fear that it's only getting worse because there's a group of people who cheer this stuff. There's a group of people who feel like they've really done some sort of yeoman's work. Now, the irony of this, of course, is that there are certain people on the right who are provocateurs who are waiting for this, who really want this. Like, I'm happy to go speak to a crowd of people with no violence, just to have the discussion. I mean, I'm perfectly happy destroying people in debate, right? I don't actually have to do it physically. But what you see very often is that there are people on the right who are itching for this. And if the left understood that, they'd be much better off, because they're actually feeding into a lot of what is driving the popularity of certain political figures.
So, but where do you see this plateauing at a certain point? Where do you think this is going?
I mean, I do think that there will be a backlash at a certain point. I think that there's going to be liberals as opposed to people on the left, and I always make that distinction, who say enough is enough. I mean, you saw Bernie Sanders, of all people, come out and defend Ann's right to speak in Berkeley. I don't know in what alternative timeline, like, were for some reason in the alternative timeline where Biff married Marty's mom. And everything is explained by this simple divergence in time, but in the time-space continuum. But yes, I mean, now I'm standing with Bernie Sanders and Bill Maher, because I think that this has gone so far that even folks on the left are beginning to look and say, this is a little bit crazy. We have to stop this.
So, but you know, it's one thing when these speakers coming up, Milo and Ann, they swoop through Berkeley and they cause these incidents, but then the Berkeley College Republicans, Alliance Conservative groups are kind of left there to go to class the next day and deal with their peers. How do you suggest to them they deal with this on a day-to-day basis?
You know, I'm not sure that on a day-to-day basis they're really dealing with it that much from their peers. I think that I think that they're the brave ones, because you're right. I mean, I come, I speak, I leave, and they have to deal with the fallout. But the truth is, most people on college campuses don't care that much about politics. Like, this is the great lie of media coverage of politics on campus. The vast majority of college students are totally apathetic about this stuff. They want to smoke pot and drink and have sex and be left alone for the most part to babble back to their professors whatever they think their professors want to hear, get the grades and leave. I mean, that's what most college students are there to do. So, you know, this idea that it's all, you know, people beating on each other for politics, I think there's a certain subsection of the campus that cares deeply about it, but I think it's a relatively small subsection. You know, going back to my days at UCLA, I'll say it for the rest of the YAF members, the college Republicans, I enjoyed the fight. I think that most people on the right sort of enjoy this. If you didn't enjoy it, then why do it? But, you know, I think that there are some notes that they should, there's some notes they should take, such as don't mouth off to a professor if it means that you're going to sacrifice your grade. I differ from some other people on the right in saying this. I think that it's very foolish for conservatives to give the baton to people on the left who want to use their power to quash conservatives. Instead, get good grades, make lots of money, give donations to the school, and get the professor fired.
So do you see a long-term solution to almost the culture war that you see at university campuses, where they, now that, people think that they're indoctrinating these youth to be, you talk a lot about, the trans rights, culture that's going on and stuff. Do you see us fighting that? Do you see us winning it? How does that happen?
Well, I mean, that's sort of a different kind of question than sort of the free speech argument to a certain extent, because that's where you see social liberals in conflict with certain basic concepts of free speech. Like my view on transgenderism is that you can call yourself whatever you want, but the minute that you demand that I call you something, now you are imposing something on me, and that's not the way this works. So this is that is a bigger battle, but I do think that there's going to be sort of a libertarian agreement that arrives on campus where people say, listen, we'll all just leave each other alone, and that'll be it, and we can all go about our lives. I think that's going to happen in America more broadly, too, because I don't think this sort of tension can keep up. I think there will be a sort of conservative libertarian merger on the right, where people on the right acknowledge that libertarians are basically right about government. Government sucks at everything, so let the government get out of it. And libertarians sort of acknowledge about conservatives that conservatives are right that you have to have some sort of social fabric that exists largely because of religious communities and people who are willing to pick each other up, so the government doesn't have to do that. And I think that if you have that, then you have the makings for a broad agreement that it's possible for people to get behind on campus. I think it's sort of similar. I think that the number one argument that seems to work when I speak on campuses to kids is just stop being a jackass. Like, why is it your business what I say? Why is it your business what I do? I'm not in your business. Why are you in mine? And I think that a lot of kids resonate to that because they've always made those arguments to conservatives, right? That's the argument they've made to conservatives about sex and about drugs. And my view is I don't care what you do sexually. I don't care what you do as far as drugs. I do care if you start trying to tell me I can't say certain things that I am certainly allowed to say and that are well within the mainstream of public opinion, by the way.
So how does this translate into elections? Does this atmosphere that exists now, does this help Republicans? Does it hurt Republicans?
I mean, this helps Republicans. I mean, it's become cliche at this point to point to, Antifa and say, this is why Trump, but this is why Trump. I mean, the fact is that Trump was a reactionary force. A lot of people looked at the left. They said they're awful, they're violent, they're over the top, And we're going to react to that by electing somebody who is not going to tell us that we're the bad guys in this particular scenario. I think that Trump was much more a reaction to the left, and he was an embodiment of conservatism. That has its upside. It also has its downside. I think that the upside is that you actually have a reaction to the left. The downside to that is that people mistake anti-left for conservative, and these are not the same thing. Just because you oppose the left, or just because, more importantly, the left opposes you, does not mean that you're actually promulgating conservative ideas. I think that holds true for Trump. I think that holds true for Milo. I think that holds true for a lot of people the right has sort of embraced as reactionary forces to battle the left without examining whether these people are actually promulgating conservative ideas or even have read the Constitution.
So I was reading through you did a Reddit AMA the other day, and I was reading through some of that, and you and I actually have something interesting in common in that in 2011, you and I...
Aside from the beard.
Yeah. You and I were both actually fans of Donald Trump in 2011 in a certain way, in that he was independent and he could run. Go back a year ago, and I actually worked for Kasich, and you were not a Trump fan.
No.
And so now, what do you think of his first 100 days, and how do you reconcile all of this?
So what I keep saying about Trump's first 100 days and about his administration so far is that Trump does not have any thoroughgoing worldview other than himself. He's an egotist. He likes applause. Sometimes that leads him to good things. Sometimes that leads him to bad things. So what I see is a guy who's sort of picking issues off the tree. If he leaves his administrators in charge, Sessions, Pruitt at EPA, if he leaves Mattis to do what Mattis does at Defense, those people tend to do their jobs. When Trump sticks his thumb in the pie, things get all bollocksed up because Trump really does not have any expertise on policy. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. The most powerful person in America, the most powerful Steve in America today is not Steve Bannon. The most powerful Steve in America today is Steve Ducey. Right, because what Trump does, he watches Fox and Friends, and then he reacts to whatever's on Fox and Friends, and that becomes his reaction to the day's news, and that drives the cycle. So that means that sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's bad. And so what I keep saying to folks is it's sort of like viewing a Seurat painting up close. If you're really close to the painting, it just looks like a bunch of dots, and you pull out, and then you see that there's actually a design to this. We're too close right now, so it's hard to tell whether this is a bunch of dots that eventually is going to look like Sunday in the Park with George, or whether we're going to pull out eventually and it's just my baby's vomit. I just don't know. So it's a little bit all over the place. I think that I agree with 70% of what he does. I disagree with probably 70% of what he says. And I think that the first 100 days is a really stupid measurement just generally, but what it does tend to do is give you an indicator of what the vision the president has for the country looks like. So Ronald Reagan spent the first 100 days of his administration pushing tax cuts, pushing for smaller government, and even though he didn't pass any legislation, he set the groundwork, and he spent the first 100 days campaigning along those lines. Bill Clinton actually had a really chaotic first 100 days, but he set the groundwork for the idea that that chaos was actually going to lead him to shift to the right, because he wasn't effective, and so he had to move to the right and to the center in order to govern well. Trump, I don't know, he never had a worldview. He doesn't really have a vision for what the country should be. Make America Great Again is a great slogan, but it doesn't really explain what he sees as the future for the country. In fact, I wrote a column, it'll be out in a couple days, talking about, there's this idea that we're now living in Trump's America. I really don't think that's the case. I think that we're living in the reaction to Obama's America still. I think that Obama sort of set the groundwork, and now Trump is still living within that framework. He's just sort of reversed the polarization a little bit. So Obama was very divisive. He had particular groups that he decided he was going to drive to the polls. He wasn't going to care about unifying Americans so much. He came about and said, Americans can be unified by this big government ideology that is embodied in me because I am the great uniter. And then he spent the next 8 years basically dividing people for political gain. And I think that Trump is living in that same framework. He's just reversed it. So I'm going to benefit particular political groups in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and I'm not going to benefit particular groups that Obama wanted to benefit, but I generally agree with Obama's basic concept, which is that a bigger government it's possible for us to unify under the auspices of a bigger government through, for example, a $1 trillion stimulus package. We all like bridges. Bridges are great, right? And I think that doesn't bode particularly well for the future of conservatism in his administration, but it all depends on who has his ear. If he's out there campaigning in Pennsylvania and he's doing more speeches in Pennsylvania, whoever cheers the loudest is the person he will resonate to. If Jared and Ivanka have his ear and they're cheering him really loudly, then he will resonate to them. My basic working theory of Trumpism right now is that Trump has a knee-jerk reaction to something that he sees on the news, and then whoever cheers him the loudest becomes his top advisor for the next foreseeable point in time, and then he sees something else that happens in the news. He has a knee-jerk reaction to that. Whoever cheers him the loudest becomes his next political advisor. This explains Bannon. This explains Jared and Ivanka, and we'll see how it plays out as time goes on. This is the problem with having a guy who does not have any real philosophy of government.
So I'm going to take advantage of having this opportunity to ask you questions and get some free business advice out of you. So I primarily run campaigns here in the Bay Area. In the Bay Area, there are 28 elected legislators on the state and federal level. Of the 28, one is Republican. Catherine Baker. So how do we win elections 10 miles outside of San Francisco as Republicans?
Again, I think that libertarianism is probably the best way to campaign in California. I think it is generally, but I think that's the best way to campaign. I also have to say, I said this to Neil Kashkari when he was running for governor over and over and over and over. Why aren't you running on crime? Right? You see that Trump ran on crime and it really helped him. You see, the only time Republicans win in blue areas is when they win on law and order, safety issues. Rudy Giuliani wins in New York because of safety issues. Richard Riordan wins in Los Angeles because of safety issues. California has a spiking crime rate because Jerry Brown has decided to redefine crime down and release a bunch of prisoners into the general population and not fund any of the prison system. And quality of life is declining. It's declining in every major city. It's declining in LA. It's declining in San Francisco. You're seeing an uptick of people on the streets because there's been a decline in funding for mental health services in the state of California. He's run this state as a disaster, and I don't think that it's out of bounds to say if you want a cleaner city, if you want a safer city, then you ought to elect people like Republicans because what you're doing clearly is not working so far. I think law and order, here's the bottom line. What the statistics tend to show is that overall in the United States, men tend to vote Republican, women tend to vote Democrat. That shifts when you talk about safety issues. This is why in 2004, security moms won George Bush the presidency for his second term. And the same thing is true in major cities. People resonate to the safety issue. And it's something like every time a Republican says, I'm going to run as the education candidate, it's like, what are you, stupid? You run as it's so stupid because it makes for an easy Democratic pitch. Okay, you want to spend X amount of dollars? I want to spend X plus 10 amount of dollars on education. But you actually have the benefit of that same logic with regard to public safety because whatever Democrat says they want to spend on the police, you say, I want to spend X plus 100 on the police, and you can actually win that particular debate. You
know, it's actually interesting you bring that up. So I was reading headlines today. Are you familiar with the BART system out here? Mm-hmm. And there was a mob of I don't know what you want to call them, but a mob of kids or teenagers boarded a BART train and actually robbed the BART train. And this was really reminiscent to me like the Wow Wow, as you see, people ride up.
Yeah, taking Pelham 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I mean, so, how do you take that and turn it into a campaign, and how do you turn votes? I mean, so you want to run for a BART director in Oakland as a Republican with things like that going on. That's what I'm saying. How do you get granular and really get, votes on the local level?
Well, again, I think that one of the things that Republicans have to assume is that it's going to be a long-term uphill battle. This is not something where you shift it overnight. This is going to be you speaking the truth over and over and over and over without fear or favor. And I think that the idea that Republicans have, which is that they're going to go soft pedal this to particular audiences, that you have to soft pedal to the black community, law enforcement, I think it's insulting to the black community. I think that if you go in there and you say to black folks, well, the reality is that the cops are out to get you, and like Rand Paul has done in certain contexts, and we really have to come up with a better way of doing things. Here is the reality of the situation. Every single community in the United States with a high crime rate has had problems with the police. Right now, the black community in the United States has a disproportionately high crime rate. That means that the police are going to have more problems in those areas. And that is not due necessarily to racism. It is due to the fact that when you bring the crime rate down, there's less areas of conflict. There are just less reasons for friction. And so what you need actually to protect innocent people is you need more law enforcement in these areas. You don't need less law enforcement in these areas. This is why I think the Black Lives Matter movement has done such a tremendous disservice to people who are living in inner cities. When you say take the cops out of the inner cities, the people who suffer or who benefit are not the law-abiding. The people who suffer are the law-abiding. Those are the people who actually need people there enforcing the law. And I think that that may be a hard message for people to swallow. But again, I think that in a republic, you have to assume that if you speak truth often enough, eventually somebody will hear you.
So last local elected question. I think you'll like this one the most. So I know campaigning here in the Bay Area, one of the biggest obstacles we get in convincing moderate and Democrat voters to vote Republican is that they usually come out and say either, yeah, I really like everything you think about, fiscal issues, but I can't get over the fact you're anti-gay marriage, or you hate trans, or you don't believe in climate change and all those things. So how do you overcome those issues with those voters who, it's not like a one-issue voter, but it's a barrier issue?
Yeah, well, I think that the libertarianism, I keep saying the word, but I think that's really the best way to approach this stuff. I mean, the fact is that I think that it is ridiculous. I think it is ridiculous that society has decided, for example, that men can be women and women can be men. I just think there's no scientific basis for that whatsoever. But do whatever the hell you want. I don't care. I mean, it's your business. You want to do whatever you want. Do whatever you want. Like this idea that I'm discriminating against you because, I am calling you by your biological sex. you don't have a right to tell me what to say. So so you do what you want, get whatever treatment you feel like, wear whatever you want, be you. I don't care. But this idea that you get to tell me what to do or say, that's silly, because I'm not telling you what to do or say. As far as same-sex marriage, my perspective on this has been clear for many years. I've always felt that long before they legalized same-sex marriage in the state of California, I said that same-sex marriage should not be a government issue. I thought the government should be completely out of the issue of marriage completely, mainly because the government sucks at things, and also because from a conservative point of view, I also think that the government approving particular types of marriage is going to provide a club for particular political groups to beat down on churches. So the next thing is going to be, okay, same-sex marriage has now been approved by the state of California. 501c3 groups, churches, that don't wish to perform same-sex marriage are now going to have their 501c3 status removed because they're discriminating against gay couples. That's the next step. So the solution to this is not to allow that discrimination against religious people and religious institutions to take place. The best step after that is to ensure that the state just gets out of it completely. And I feel the same way about marijuana, even though I have never smoked pot and I find people who smoke pot irritating. It's not my business, right? It's not the government's business either. So I think that the government getting out of all of these things is actually a good pitch, because again, I'm leaving you alone. I think it's actually a winning campaign now with Trump in office, because the left hates Trump so much that they keep thinking, oh my God, we created this massive machine and now someone we desperately hate is in charge of it. Like, hey, welcome to the last 8 years, gang. But the best solution to that is, okay, you don't like Trump. I didn't like Obama. Guess what? We can make all of these people not matter to our lives. All we have to do is just make the government not that big. And then I don't care what Trump does, and I don't care what Obama does, and they'll just be egotists who live in big cities and bother, whoever will listen to them at the bar. This is the biggest problem. The fact is that when the government is big, who is in charge matters. When the government is small, you don't have to care.
So I'll let you have your Marco Rubio moment. There's a lot of college students in the club, or in the audience, and I think, or even younger, or people that have graduated but still young, and even some college Republicans here. Not everybody could become a nationally syndicated columnist at 17. What advice do you have for younger people that are wanting to get started in their career, or conservatives on campus? How do they make the most of their lives?
So I'll give you the same advice Andrew Breitbart gave to a lot of people. If you have a cell phone that's a camera, you're now a journalist. So it is your job to go out there and find information that no one else is privy to, particularly if you're on campus. That stuff has widespread public appeal. If you see a story, send it to me at Daily Wire, and we'll put it up. We'll cover it. And if you want to write. You're going to have to write for free at the beginning. Everyone does. I did. And then eventually you move from sort of reporting news to your perspective actually being interesting, because you can infuse your opinion into the news in a way that's interesting. And then people want to hear what you have to say. Everybody thinks they're going to be Charles Krauthammer, but everybody sort of has to start off as John Stossel. You all have to start off reporting things, and then you can move into an area where people actually care about what you have to say, if you're lucky. But everyone has an opinion, and your opinion doesn't matter more than anybody else's until you're bringing information to people that they've never heard before.
So, completely changed subjects. Biggest threat to America right now, and why?
I think the biggest threat to America is tribalism. I think that tribalism has broken out on the left and the right. People don't seem to care about the truth anymore. They seem to care about whether it helps my side or helps your side. And that is really, really dangerous, because then we can no longer have a conversation. If we can't agree on a common basis of fact, we can't have a conversation in the first place. If you're just going to assume that I'm evil on the basis of my political perspective, then we can't have a conversation. And I'm seeing it both on the right and the left, which is troubling to me, because I always thought that this was sort of an endemic to the left. I didn't think it was endemic to the right. I think that Obama has sort of trolled the right into oblivion, and the right now has become reactionary in response. And so it's, okay, so Trump said something that's not true, but he really screwed with the left's head, didn't he? And so, well, so what? That's not hard. It's the easiest thing in the world is to screw with the left's head. That's really not difficult. And on the left, the same sort of thing. You'll see the left say that Trump has proposed a Muslim ban. No, he didn't propose a Muslim ban. On the right, you'll see that people say Trump has proposed. Trump actually had a bigger inauguration crowd size than Obama. Right? A plurality of Republicans believe that by polls. That's silly. Okay, it's not true. And just because you like Trump doesn't make it true. And this basic philosophy, I think, is really dangerous for the Republic as a whole.
What do you think about the whole fake news thing? There's actually a bill in California now where they actually want to create a curriculum in high schools to educate students on what fake news is.
Okay, well, first of all, the high schools in California should be the last people to teach people. I think that the idea that there are high schools in California may be fake news, but that's But it's, the problem with fake news is mostly that people don't use it to mean actual fake news. Fake news is when you when you have a story that is legitimately false, right? When you put a story out there that Pizzagate is fake news, right? There's no evidence to support it. The idea that they're running some sort of child whorehouse out of a pizza shop in the middle of D.C., no evidence to back that. That's fake news. It is not fake news to say that Donald Trump is doing better than his detractors suppose, but people will say that's fake news. It is not fake news, by the way, for the polls to report what the polls reported and then get it wrong. That wasn't fake news either. The polls just got it wrong. So I think that on both sides there's been a conflation between news I don't like and fake news, and that's not the same thing. And so this is why I think that the label has lost pretty much all value.
So, North Korea, are we headed to World War III or the status quo of the last 20 years?
I would say more likely the status quo of the last 20 years. I don't think that Kim Jong-un really wants us to wipe him off the map. And that's sort of the next step, right? There's, thanks to Bill Clinton, we have an unpalatable situation there, but I'm not sure that it's going to go anywhere. I mean, the fact is that we don't have the wherewithal, from as much as I can see, we don't have the wherewithal to actually take out the Kim family. We don't have the wherewithal to take out all of the artillery that's now lined up against Seoul at one shot. So that means that he's got 20,000 pieces of ordnance that are pointed at Seoul, which puts several million people in direct danger of death if we should do anything about this. The smartest move that Kim Jong-un ever made, or his father Kim Jong-il ever made, was to develop nuclear weapons, because now it's basically impossible to get rid of him unless we put significant pressure on the Chinese to replace him with somebody else. And the thing the Chinese want less even than the thing that they are most fearful of is the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. That, of course, is what they are most afraid of. So they would rather have a crazy person in charge of that country that they at least have some semblance of control over than a reunified, democratic, and free Korea, which is tragic. But I think that status quo is basically as good as it's going to get, barring some sort of exigent circumstance.
So what do you think what's going on in France? You think Le Pen and just the whole, where do you think that's going?
I mean, I think Le Pen's going to lose. I mean, I think that the fact is that anybody who is trying to compare that to Brexit or compare it to Trump, all of those polls were within 2 points, 3 points. These polls are not close. These polls are 26 points out. Now,
hello, everyone. Hey, I'm just stopping by to remind you that liberals are insane. Social justice warriors are becoming more violent and triggered than ever before. Anyways, be sure to subscribe to KGPTV on YouTube and have a blessed day. Yeah, man.
Tell me what you
Weed's a downer. So in any case, so to finish the thought, I'm for decriminalization of weed, but I find people who smoke weed to be losers. So that's my brief summation, because it kills your brain cells and it's a waste of time.
Jordan says, with the Portugal experimenting of decriminalization of all drugs being moderately successful, is legalizing and regulating any or all drug sales a viable way to help combat the power and wealth of gangs in cities like Chicago? I'm not for using drugs just against the black market. So, I'm pretty libertarian when it comes to drugs. There are certain drugs that cause externalities, like PCP makes people violent. That should be illegal. But if you're talking about drugs that you just take and it makes you high and you ruin your life, that's really your business as long as I'm not paying for it. The big problem with decriminalization of drugs is you have to ensure that the decriminalized price of drugs is below the street market price of drugs. So one of the problems we have in California is you decriminalize marijuana, but the price that you get at the marijuana dispensary is still higher than black market marijuana, so people still buy on the black market. You haven't destroyed the black market. You just created a black market that is in competition with the real market. In order to really do this, it would work. Actually, decriminalization of drugs, there's a good case to be made that decriminalization of drugs would actually work better on the level of harder core drugs that are more expensive rather than cheaper drugs. That would actually be the case, the strong case, the economic case for decriminalization. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. Over the last couple of days, Joe Biden has been out there talking, and one of the things he's been talking about is what he likes to call the cancer moonshot. Well, I didn't know cancer was on the moon, but there you have it. So the cancer moonshot. This is the idea that we're going to spend inordinate amounts of federal money in order to research cancer treatments and end cancer. We'll listen to Joe Biden talk about it for a second, then I'll tell you what I don't like about this. Here's Joe Biden.
I've committed, and I promised before we leave, we will mow down any of the impediments that exist bureaucratically in the federal government to slow up the process.
So cooperation is one key. Money is a key. And I know that you've asked for $1 billion.
And we will get $1 billion because this is the, I've been doing this a long time. This is a truly bipartisan issue.
Okay, so it's a bipartisan issue. You'll get lots and lots of money. The barrier, there's always this idea on the left, and it's easy to fall into on the right too, that all the differences between us curing cancer and not curing cancer is just throwing money at the problem from a federal government perspective. It isn't true. It isn't true. There are certain areas in which the federal government is useful and good, although they screw it up a lot too, like vaccinations, for example, production of vaccinations during an emergency. There have been times in American history where we've gone into production on vaccines and it's been a complete waste of time, like in the 1970s. When it comes to cancer, first of all, people think of cancer as one disease. It isn't. It's an enormous spectrum of diseases. There are many different types of cancer. I'm speaking as somebody, my aunt died at 42 of cancer, of breast cancer. My other aunt had a preliminary double mastectomy because she was afraid of getting cancer. My grandfather died of cancer. My father has had a melanoma. Like, this is, this is something that everybody in the United States has experienced. What I'm saying here is I don't like the idea that government is God, and if we just give it enough power, it'll cure cancer for us. It's not true. Okay, what's actually going to cure cancer is not the kind of things the federal government is doing, but the things that the federal government hates on, like the pharmaceutical companies, the drug companies that actually produce the research that leads to practical results. So what the federal government does, they fund grants. My wife works in the medical industry. She's worked at a lab. This is true. They fund grants. The grants are for broad-based research. The idea is supposed to be that this broad-based research is then used to create the drugs that we use to treat the disease. That is very infrequent. Usually the way medicines are developed is that it's trial and error, right? This is why you have animal trials. It's not like, oh, we're going to go at it conceptually, a priori, blank slate. We just come in, tabula rasa, and we just create it out of our mind. Instead, what it is.
Before this video starts, I'd just like to make an announcement. I have the Liberal Tears mug for $14.99 on my website. It is the first link in the description if you want to go pick one up. Don't worry if it breaks when it comes to your house. I'll send you another one for free out of my pocket. I don't care. I want you to get your Liberal Tear mug. It comes in Liberal Tears white with the face, black with the face, white without the face, and black without the face. So pick whichever one you want, and it'll come to your door in about 3 to 5 days. So that should be epic. First link in the description. Thank you. Let's go on with the video.
Pennsylvania and State College. I want to know what your opinion is. Weed, yay or nay?
So decriminalization of weed, yay, weed, nay. Okay, meaning that I'm libertarian when it comes to weed. I will also say that the no.
I'm not going to attack you, bro. I'm not going to attack you.
I didn't think you were going to. You're high.